Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to this week's episode of the CVC Home Service Success Network. This is produced and presented each and every week by CVC Success Group. And we do this, our motivation, our mission, the reason we do this is to share ideas, to share concepts, to share processes with the listeners and things that they can help them take their businesses to the level they envision. And each and every week, we try to come up with a topic that we feel is timely and good. And a lot of it is based, to be honest with you, on our conversations each and every week with different people through our coaching practices and the services we provide for our clients. Because we see things out there that are happening in the very real world, and they certainly are a challenge to any business manager that's out there today. Which brings us to the topic for the day. Do you have low producing team members? And what as a manager are you going to do whenever you encounter this? Now, what drove this particular topic this week was I was forwarded by one of my clients a newsletter that he gets every day, and it is written by a gentleman by the name of Larry Janeski. And the title of this is Think Daily for Business People. And the article that he sent me said, question, weak or average people dilute great teams. Let me repeat that. Weak or average people dilute great teams. And this is a very short article. I'm going to read it to you. Say you have a team and there are 9 great people and 1 not so great one. Think about this. What about your team? Do you have some great people and some that are just so-so? How much would you think the not so great one is dragging down the overall performance and morale of the team? More than 10%, I can tell you that. It's a lot more than you think. Weak or bad team players bring down the performance, the motivation, the standards, engagement of the entire team in an outsized proportion to their numbers. Think for a minute. Who are your weakest players? And he asked some really good questions. One of them is, if this person were to quit, would you hire them again? And then he asked the next question, so why do you keep them? And he ended it by saying addition by subtraction with a statement. Wouldn't it be great if they worked for your competitors? Think about that. Would it be great if they weren't on your team? Would your team get ahead? And as we look at this, like I said, phone calls with my clients and my site visits with them bring this to light so greatly today because this is exactly what we see. Only yesterday, I was talking to an operations manager who was having problems with workforce. One of his boys actually walked off on the job. A couple days later, guess what another one did? And his words were, well, what's so bad? When he walked off, you didn't do anything about it. So what's the problem with me doing it? So Cheryl, as I go through that, I sent you this article. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, everybody has what we call low hanging fruit at times. But if it's interfering, there's always somebody that's at the bottom. But if they're still doing mass production and doing well, they're still a viable thing. But when they're sitting there doing like the one guy did, he's doing something and everybody sees it. If you don't do something about it, then they assume they can. And it's an assumption everybody makes. Okay, that one's not having to write this report, so why should I have to write it? Now you have 2 people not writing it. And we've seen this over and over when some really good people have followed the lead of the person that should have been fired well prior to the time that they were.
Yeah. So what it does, and I have something here on my desk. Sometimes I'll take a picture of these and send it to a client when he talks about it, because what's happening is in today's world, so many people think they are handcuffed. That's right, handcuffed. And they've got to keep these people on staff when actually they're doing them more damage than they're doing good. So, what's the answer to this, Cheryl? I think this starts in the interview process. This is what you do every day. You have multiple phone calls every single day. You're interviewing new prospects from all across the country. What's some of the questions that you ask them to see, is this going to be a person that's going to fit in with this company culture and its goals?
Well, number one, I asked, there's some questions that, especially two, that I asked. What have you done? Tell me something that you've done that was successful, and what do you think made it successful? What did you do to help it? And then I asked another one of what is something you failed at, but what did you learn from it? And usually from those two, I can find out if they fit into the culture of the company that I'm looking at, because they really dig deep for these answers. It amazed me when I first started asking them that people would even answer them, if you understand what I'm saying. But they do, and you can see if they're more creative. You see this side that you can't read in a resume. So they work well. But as you know, my interviews have got longer because there's got to be more and more questions now. Never would I have ever thought in an interview that I would have had to ask if you could read a tape measure. Now I have to put questions like that only because of one of the guys that was the guy that we're talking about. He shouldn't have been there. Okay. So the thing about it is just trying to ask enough cultural questions up and above the business questions to see what that person is actually like, whether they're going to fit, whether they really want to stay. I always asked, are you looking for a job or a career, as a rule? And if they say a career, my next question is, how long do you expect a career to be? Because in our lifetime, a career was years. In today's generation, if you get to 2 to 3 years out of a guy, he has made that, that was his career in this profession.
Yep. So I've asked you this question before. If you were to interview 100 people, 100 different applicants, on an average, how many of those would you recommend to the employer that they go further with this prospect?
I'm going to use if they're looking for somebody really good, not just a laborer. If they're looking for somebody that they can make a person out of, usually about 5.
So about 5% of the applicants that you talk to are actually applicants that you would recommend to the business if they're looking for someone. We both know there are clients that are looking for warm bodies. They just want a body.
For those, I hate interviewing for those.
Right, which we know is going to turn into a dead end street as a rule. We see this happening. The data is there. But again, proper interviewing to make sure this person meets with it, I think, is the first step to avoid this happening. I think the second step is having an employee manual that details down what the expectations of the job are, and going through an onboarding process where this is reviewed with the candidate during the face-to-face review interview process. So what's your thought processes on that, Cheryl? How often is this where the failure starts?
I think it starts real early with that, because if you don't have it in writing, you can't hold them accountable, because they're going to swear you didn't say something. But if you've got, I'm not a checklist fan at all, but if you've got a semi-form of something that you can check off, that you can run them through a particular course, that they can see it, that they can go back to review it. I think it's imperative nowadays. Used to, you didn't have to do that much, but now I think it's imperative, because I think, honestly, a lot of the people of today like to be held accountable.
Okay, I understand. So then the next thing is, how are they trained in the job? What is the training curriculum? On past episodes, we've talked about proficiency charts and how you have to build a technician. Because, Cheryl, how often did you get an interviewee that's actually done this type of work? What's the percentage you interview that are experienced in the field they're applying to?
Very few. Maybe two a month max.
So you may have 2 experienced people a month that actually answer an ad. So what this means is, folks, whatever your chosen industry is, you're going to have to put together a training curriculum for this person to follow. It's all part of the steps. It's part of the steps of success and how to make the process successful. The next is, how are you tracking and measuring? Because one of the things you've got to do is be able to track and measure how your employees are doing. And so often we get the conversation about Joe or Jack or John or whatever his name is, that he's not a good hire. He is not working like we need him to do. And what I find out then as I get into the conversation, this has been happening for a while. Which brings it back that often, and Cheryl hates what I'm getting ready to say, but this is where you got to track and measure and know when this person is not meeting your criteria. And you've got to do, as Barney Fife says, you got to nip it in the bud. You got to be watching your people. You assign them to a training curriculum, and you've got to track and measure how they are doing. And there's got to be rewards for them as they move through this process, as they scale up the proficiency chart. Yes, there's got to be a way to reward them for doing that. So your compensation plan comes into play. Because here's the God's honest truth, folks. If you get one person on your team, he will drag down the rest of your team to his level. The rest of the team can be extraordinary. And the problem is, unless you do your job as the manager, you're not going to lift this guy up to the level of the others unless you take proactive action from day one, following him all the way through. Complaints about absenteeism. You got to nip it in the bud when it starts. Not after they've been absent every Monday, couple Mondays a month, they're out. That's telling you something. When your employee is calling in sick on Mondays or the day after payday, folks, it's telling you something there. You got to be able to delve into this and take the action. So if you have low producing team members, I'm going to hit you right between the eyes. It's your fault. You are allowing them to be low producing team members. And I see so many people that finally take the action, terminate a person that's not meeting the criteria, and they find out that they're ahead of the ball game. Share what's your thoughts on this before we end today's episode.
I've seen companies actually spiral and go up when they let go of an employee they thought was the one that was holding the company together. They let him go, the others pick up, and they go so much faster. And it's just a couple days before they've taken over the other guy's position and they have moved on forward. I think what it is, I mean, we see it not just in business, it's in lives. I mean, if you've got a whiner in a family, they'll pull other people down. So can you imagine in a group of people, somebody's going to whine about everything that's done. They're not doing their part. They're not sharing the responsibilities. Again, it's just the others are going to hear it. They're going to follow in suit. This country notoriously is a group of followers. And so the thing about it is, if you can't hold them accountable, you really can't blame them.
Yep. So the end is, I'm going to read this article again. Weak or average people dilute great teams. Say you have a team. There are 9 great people and 1 not so great member of that team. How much would you think the not so great one is dragging down the overall performance and morale of the team? More than 10%. I can tell you that. It's a lot more than you think. Weak or bad team players bring down the performance, the motivation, the standards, and engagement of the entire team in an outsized proportion to their numbers. Who are your weakest players? And if they quit, would you hire them again? Then the question is, why do you keep them? Because the way to add to your business often is going to be by subtraction. And think about this. Wouldn't it be great if they worked for your competition? Think about that. These are ideas because as a business, you have assets. You can buy equipment. You can buy trucks. You can buy warehouse. You can buy materials. You can buy all these different things. But the number one asset that's going to produce for you in your home service business is going to be that number one asset, which is your people. So what you got to have is have the top producing models working on your team, the top producing. Cheryl, anything else you want to add to this topic?
I just want to say that, again, business owners, managers need to keep their eyes open. They need to catch it early, because catching it late, they've already spoiled part of your barrel. So look at it, make sure that you keep an eye on it.
Nip it in the bud, right?
I wasn't going to say it, but go for it.
That's what you do. You nip it in the bud. When you got these problems, don't let them linger and fester. They're not going to cure themselves. And if you're allowing them to be on your team, guess what? Their performance is your fault as the manager. Hard as that is to accept it, you got to accept it. It may come at you hard, but folks, that's the way it is. And with that, we're going to end this week's episode of the CVC Home Service Success Network. Every week, we appreciate you joining us. We know a lot of you can't join us every Friday at noon on our live, but we appreciate you watching. We really appreciate the views that we're getting on the replays through the week, because they are building and growing exponentially. And also listen to our podcast, because we also turn this into a podcast, and we're found on most of your podcast channels. So appreciate your support. I'm Jerry Eisenhower, and this is Cheryl Eisenhower. We're with CVC Success Group. If we can help you take your business to your business dreams, that destination you dream of, we're as simple as an email or a phone call away. Let's have a conversation, and let's see if we can get your business into the position where you want it to be. Have a fantastic weekend, and let's look forward to the week ahead. Thanks for joining us. It's been an honor. It's been a privilege, and it's been a pleasure.